In the vast expanse of the galaxy, humanity had always been seen as a fledgling species, weak, insignificant, and easily crushed. But when the Xel'Varn Empire decided to bomb Earth, they made a grave mistake. The galaxy underestimated what would happen next. What the Xel'Varn didn't know was that humanity doesn't just fight back. Humanity eradicates. And this time the stars themselves would burn for it. The first strike came without warning. An overwhelming barrage of orbital bombardments that turned Earth's skyline into firestorms. The Xel'Varn Empire, a race of smug, highly intelligent aliens, had always seen humanity as an amusing, primitive species, something to be corrected with a little re-education. They believed Earth was an easy target, a low-risk, low-reward conquest. They were wrong. The bombs fell like rain, tearing through buildings, melting cities, and creating craters that reached the depths of Earth's crust. The Xel'Varn expected mass panic, a frenzy of survivors cowering in fear, begging for mercy. Instead, what they got was a strange, almost eerie calm. Humanity had endured worse. Wars, plagues, invasions, surviving and fighting back was embedded in their DNA. The cities may have burned, but people didn't. As the skies crackled with the energy of fallen bombs, Earth's inhabitants moved into action not with terror, but with grim determination. No one was running. No one was hiding. There were no speeches from leaders, no frantic emergency broadcasts. No, the only sound was the rumble of engines and the hum of massive machines as Earth's response unfolded. On the outside, it seemed like a slow-motion apocalypse. The death toll from the initial bombardment was staggering, but behind the scenes, a far more dangerous process was underway. The factories that once churned out consumer goods, electronics, and cars, they shifted to one thing only: weapons. And not just any weapons. Earth was preparing for a war that no one, least of all the Xel'Varn, was ready for. Meanwhile, the Xel'Varn watched from their warships orbiting above, expecting humanity to collapse, to break under the pressure. What they didn't understand was that this was Earth's version of an angry napalm-covered "don't mess with me" sign. Then came the message. It wasn't a plea for peace. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a warning. It was simple, brief, and delivered with the kind of sass that made entire empires rethink their strategies. You bombed us? Adorable. Watch this. The Xel'Varn recoiled in disbelief. Surely this was a bluff. Surely these fragile, primitive creatures couldn't respond to their advanced technology with such flippant arrogance. But just as they began to doubt, Earth's silent preparations turned deadly serious. Earth didn't need to beg for mercy or announce its plans. It simply let its actions speak louder than any words ever could. They knew the Xel'Varn wouldn't understand until it was too late. So humanity went to work. The machines hummed, their engines powered up, and the humans, those formerly weak beings, had just one thing to say to the invaders: try. They didn't need to wait for the Xel'Varn to launch another strike. Humanity's retaliation was already in motion. And unlike the Xel'Varn, humanity wasn't playing around. The war wasn't about revenge, it was about something much more terrifying: humanity's ability to adapt, to innovate, and to eradicate anything standing in their way. And the Xel'Varn were about to find that out the hard way. As Earth's engines roared to life, one thing was clear: the Xel'Varn had no idea what they were in for. The Xel'Varn had underestimated humanity in the worst way. After their initial bombardment, they expected a show of weakness, maybe a few desperate cries for peace, a scattering of survivors fleeing to underground bunkers, and, ultimately, humanity would kneel. But instead, they saw something far more terrifying: silence. For the first time, Earth fell utterly still. The bombs had rained down, fires had scorched the land, but the world didn't spiral into chaos. The Xel'Varn expected the planet to be reeling in pain, its leaders scrambling for some kind of desperate, futile defense. What they got was a void. Humanity had done something no one anticipated: it had gone dark. Not in the sense of panic or fear, but something far more unsettling: Earth had turned inward. The bustling cities emptied out. The frenetic energy of everyday life ceased. No broadcasts, no pleas, no emergency signals, just an eerie, almost oppressive silence. It was as though Earth had pulled the plug on the universe itself, choosing to handle the situation in its own way. The Xel'Varn thought this was a sign of submission. After all, in their experience, when a planet stopped screaming in terror, it meant it had accepted its fate. Their smugness grew, their confidence bloated as they continued to observe Earth's peaceful state. But what they didn't realize was that humanity was never going to scream. It wasn't how they worked. The silence wasn't fear, it was the calm before the storm. From their lofty perch in space, the Xel'Varn decided it was time to rub salt in the wound. They issued an ultimatum, not expecting anything more than a feeble response. They announced that Earth had lost. They promised the survivors would be taken as slaves, that humanity's reign was over. In typical Xel'Varn fashion, they didn't even bother to check if their prey was still breathing. Why would they? Humanity was too small to fight back, right? Then came the real shocker. The Xel'Varn watched as Earth's technology slowly powered up. Massive structures they had never seen before coming to life. It wasn't just a handful of ships preparing to retaliate, it was a system. A silent machine that churned like clockwork, preparing for something far larger. The sudden surge in energy wasn't random, it was a calculated response. They had no idea what was coming, but they sure as hell were about to find out. The once silent planet now hummed with purpose. Weapons previously thought to be part of Earth's mythology, massive space cannons, solar reflectors, and energy absorbers began to activate. The Xel'Varn watched, clueless, as their own satellites picked up disturbing signals from humanity's base of operations. A distant rumble shook their ships as Earth's forces moved into position. They expected a counterattack, but they didn't expect it to come from the sun itself. Humanity's weapon wasn't just designed to fight, they had developed a way to manipulate the very stars in their sky. It wasn't just an answer to the Xel'Varn's aggression. It was an invitation to a reckoning. The Xel'Varn fleet, still floating above Earth like pompous peacocks, suddenly felt small. Their ships weren't as imposing when compared to the solar firestorm humanity was about to unleash. They had been so sure of their victory, so smug in their assumptions about human fragility. But now they were starting to feel the first hints of doubt. As Earth's engines hummed louder, the Xel'Varn began to realize that they had just woken up a force they could never control. They had poked the bear. And now, the bear was getting ready to swipe. The Xel'Varn's confidence began to crack when the first warning came, not from a fleet, not from a sudden barrage of missiles, but from the sun itself. They had never seen anything like it before. No one had. Humanity's engineering had never been so obvious or so deadly. Earth had built something unimaginable, something beyond their wildest expectations. A weapon, but not just any weapon. Humanity's ingenuity had birthed a solar harvester, a network of massive space stations designed to collect the energy of their own sun. But this wasn't for generating power for the planet or fueling starships. This was for turning the sun into a weapon of mass destruction. The Xel'Varn watched as the sensors picked up energy fluctuations at an alarming rate. It was no ordinary heat spike or magnetic anomaly. No, this was something far more terrifying. The solar panels and reflectors began to move, shifting, realigning. The sun's energy was being siphoned off, funneled into a concentrated beam. Then, like a switch being flipped, the light began to bend. It wasn't a flare. It wasn't a typical solar outburst. It was something intentional, a calculated, directed force. The Xel'Varn scrambled to make sense of the readings, but their algorithms couldn't keep up with the raw power humanity had harnessed. The sun wasn't just burning, it was a weapon aimed directly at their colonies. Meanwhile, on Earth, humanity's response was entirely casual. No frantic rush, no over-the-top speeches. There was a certain chill in the air, almost as if they were casually making tea while their enemies were about to be reduced to space dust. The message wasn't about vengeance, it was about efficiency. They didn't need to retaliate with fleets and armies. They had just one thing to do: turn off the lights for the Xel'Varn. The first target was a Xel'Varn colony at the edge of the solar system. The beam, concentrated with an energy that had never been seen in the galaxy, shot out from Earth, blazing through space. In a matter of moments, the colony went dark. No explosion. No fiery deaths. Just a cold, calculated silence. The sun had done its job. A whole system gone in the blink of an eye. The Xel'Varn couldn't believe it. They had never even considered the possibility that humanity had the technology to weaponize an entire star. They laughed at the idea of Earth being anything more than a speck on the galactic map. And now they were watching as their carefully constructed empire crumbled under a single, directed solar beam. Their command center erupted into chaos. There were frantic calls from their commanders, desperate attempts to communicate with the surviving colonies, but it was no use. The sun's blast had destroyed any and all communication lines. Their carefully built infrastructure gone. Their military useless. Their arrogance shattered. And Earth was already moving on to the next target. The message, loud and clear, was becoming painfully obvious. You didn't just attack a planet. You attacked a species that knew how to use everything around it to bring down a goddamn empire. Humanity wasn't a passive target anymore. They were the architects of destruction. They were the ones who would decide when the stars blinked out. And the Xel'Varn were about to learn one very hard truth: never, ever poke the bear. The Xel'Varn were still reeling from the first strike. They had assumed it was a fluke, a one-time mistake. Surely humanity couldn't have just wiped out an entire colony with a single blast from their sun. They were wrong. As the Xel'Varn scrambled to recover from the shock, Earth's second move came faster, deadlier, and with the same casual precision that had already wiped one colony off the map. This time there was no warning. No ominous rumble from deep space. Just silence. The Xel'Varn's sensors detected a second solar beam, a burst of energy so intense it wasn't just heating up the target, it was melting it. The target. Another Xel'Varn colony, this time closer to the heart of their empire. The entire system, from its planets to its orbiting stations, was obliterated in an instant. There was no explosion, no dramatic display of fireworks, just the silent, efficient snuffing out of an entire world. A flash of light. And then nothing. For the first time, the Xel'Varn realized they weren't fighting just a primitive species. They were up against a civilization that didn't play fair. They didn't take prisoners. They didn't have mercy. They didn't care about flashy battles or heroic last stands. Humanity's war strategy was simple: make it quick, make it clean, and make sure you don't need to do it again. The fleet commanders, still hiding in their pristine ships, sent out frantic orders to retreat. They had underestimated Earth's power and were paying the price. But the Xel'Varn were used to fleeting victories. They believed in their technology, their superior firepower. After all, the universe had never seen anything like their ships or their weapons. What they failed to consider was that humanity wasn't just outgunned. They were outthinking the whole damn galaxy. On Earth, the response was as effortless as flipping a switch. Humanity wasn't just reacting, it was leading the fight. The energy from the solar beams was getting more precise, more concentrated with each shot. Humanity had learned, evolved, and perfected a weapon that not even the most advanced minds in the galaxy could have predicted. And then came the next bombshell. The Xel'Varn fleet, still floating out of reach, still convinced they had time to regroup, watched in horror as Earth turned its attention elsewhere. Instead of focusing on their fleet, humanity's next target was their own star. The Xel'Varn had no idea that Earth had already mastered star manipulation, controlling not just the energy output of their own sun, but also creating artificial black holes capable of draining entire systems of energy. They had never even considered the possibility. After all, who would? The ability to destroy a star. That was the stuff of legends. But humanity wasn't creating legends. They were creating catastrophes. One by one, the Xel'Varn saw their own stars flicker. Their once powerful suns started dimming. They couldn't understand it. Their sensors went wild, reading impossible numbers, impossible forces. The gravity wells of their stars began to distort. And before they knew it, their home system was completely gone. No ships, no stations, no survivors, just emptiness. The Xel'Varn tried to make sense of it. They had never faced a species that could bring a star to its knees. But now they were staring into the abyss, a place where their arrogance couldn't save them. And Earth? Earth was already eyeing their next target. Humanity didn't need to declare war. They didn't need speeches. They simply delivered one message: you're cute when you think you have control. The Xel'Varn fleet was in full retreat. Their once grand empire, built on the belief that no species could challenge them, was crumbling faster than they could fathom. They had underestimated Earth plain and simple. They had thought humanity's survival instincts were their greatest weapon. They had no idea that those instincts had evolved into something far worse. In their panic, the Xel'Varn leaders ordered every available ship to flee. They didn't care about strategy anymore, they just wanted to get out. But as they scattered, a terrifying truth settled in: there was nowhere to hide. The sun's energy had already crippled their farthest colonies, and Earth's weaponized solar network was already in motion, tracking every Xel'Varn vessel Vartel in orbit. Humanity had their locations pinpointed, their movements anticipated. Every escape route the Xel'Varn considered was already blocked off. The Xel'Varn had been so sure of their own superiority that they'd never thought to even check the exits. Now they were trapped. And if there was one thing humanity knew, it was how to make a fight uncomfortable. Back on Earth, people weren't celebrating. They weren't cheering, patting each other on the back for their quick victories. No, humanity's work wasn't done. They'd only just begun. Every move they made seemed less like an act of revenge and more like a very efficient business transaction. Humanity had a plan, and it was simple. It didn't involve flashy heroics or drawn-out battles. It didn't need speeches or declarations of war. It was about one thing only: elimination. Every single Xel'Varn ship, every last soldier, was now a target. The enemy had tried to wipe them out. Humanity's response was simple: no one left alive. The Xel'Varn couldn't believe the strategy unfolding. They weren't used to having the tables turned. In their view, they were always the ones making demands, always the ones holding the advantage. Now they were the ones who were small, insignificant, at the mercy of a species that had been underestimated for far too long. Meanwhile, Earth's weapons continued to rain down, but now humanity had perfected something far more subtle: a gravitational weapon that no one could have predicted. The Xel'Varn didn't see it coming. The human ships fired at nothing. And then, with no warning, the space around them began to distort. A small, artificial black hole formed, sucking everything in its path into a crushing void. The first few Xel'Varn ships vanished, drawn into the collapsing nothingness. And still, no one on Earth celebrated. No one cheered. It wasn't about winning. It was about making sure they never dared to attack again. The Xel'Varn fleet began to scatter, jumping to different sectors, hoping to escape the growing storm. But Earth had already anticipated their every move. Their next weapon wasn't a direct strike. No, it was far more insidious. Humanity had developed a system of traps, not explosions, not missiles, but entire regions of space where time itself bent in on itself. The Xel'Varn ships started to disappear, pulled into spatial anomalies, where time ran backwards or stretched endlessly. Nothing made sense. The Xel'Varn had tried to escape reality, but they were falling into a trap of their own making. As the last of their ships vanished into the fold, Earth's forces didn't stop. They just moved on to the next task, ensuring that the Xel'Varn would never again feel brave enough to strike. Their message was clear: we're not here to negotiate. We're here to make sure you never forget this. The Xel'Varn had learned a painful truth: the universe didn't belong to them. It belonged to the ones who were clever enough to turn it into a weapon. And humanity. Humanity had just flipped the script. The last of the Xel'Varn fleet was gone. Earth's defenses had turned the tables with an efficiency that still left their enemies gasping. No last-minute escape, no great war of attrition. The Xel'Varn had expected an epic confrontation, but what they got was a systematic disassembly of everything they had worked for. Their ships, their colonies, their very belief in their invincibility, all of it was reduced to cosmic dust. But humanity wasn't finished yet. They weren't the kind of species to stop just because the enemy had been wiped off the map. Oh no, Earth had bigger plans. The Xel'Varn weren't the only ones who had learned the harsh lesson that day. Earth had learned something too: how to end a war before it ever started. Back on Earth, life went on as usual. Cities didn't burn, governments didn't crumble. No mass panic, no crazy attempts to rebuild what was lost. The entire planet had simply moved on. Humans didn't celebrate their victory. They didn't throw parades. They just returned to their routine, waking up, going to work, and forgetting that they had just erased an entire empire from the galactic map. The Xel'Varn had expected resistance to their attacks. They had expected a planet to break under pressure, to bend under the weight of their superior firepower. Instead, they had encountered an entire species that didn't bow, didn't panic, and certainly didn't beg. What had begun as an invasion turned into a microwave meal of defeat, quick, precise, and leaving no room for leftovers. Now, in the cold recesses of space, the remnants of their once great fleet floated aimlessly. Some had been obliterated by gravitational fields, others sucked into black holes, others caught in loops where time didn't just bend, it froze. There was no escape from what had been unleashed. The universe itself seemed to be rejecting the Xel'Varn's existence. But even with all this power on Earth's side, humanity didn't feel the need to keep the momentum going. Their message was already clear: we could keep going. We could keep burning your ships and collapsing your stars, but we don't need to. You've already lost. The true mastery of the humans' response wasn't in their weapons. It wasn't in the fleets, or the solar weapons, or the unstoppable gravitic devices. It was in their utter lack of interest in further conflict. The Xel'Varn had been cut down, erased, and then humanity simply moved on. They didn't care to gloat. They didn't need to hammer the point home. The Xel'Varn had destroyed civilizations before, yes. They had conquered systems and crushed empires. But the problem with attacking Earth was simple. They didn't know what they were up against. They had just run into a force that wasn't about power, wasn't about might. It was about being so far beyond them that they didn't even register as a threat. And so the Xel'Varn fleet dissolved into the void of space, a smudge of their former glory. It wasn't the way they had imagined their fate. They hadn't been brought low by a great battle or an overwhelming army. No, they had been undone by something far more terrifying: human indifference. Humanity had demonstrated that sometimes the most dangerous thing to face isn't a powerful opponent. It's a species that knows exactly how to bane the game without ever breaking a sweat. The Xel'Varn? They had just learned the hard way that never was it a good idea to poke the bear. In the aftermath, the galaxy began to buzz. The once feared Xel'Varn Empire, which had crushed countless civilizations, was no more. What remained of their fleets was little more than scattered debris floating through space, drifting aimlessly like lost dreams. The news spread like wildfire across the stars, with every species, every empire, realizing one undeniable fact: humanity had arrived. For the first time, other races began to look at Earth not as a curiosity, but as a dominant force. No longer were they seen as a fragile, fledgling species. They were now the ones that made other species rethink their strategies. They weren't just survivors. They were kings of the cosmic playground, and the Xel'Varn had learned that the hard way. But humanity, in its usual fashion, didn't sit around basking in victory. No loud speeches, no medals handed out. They didn't care about being hailed as heroes or saviors of the galaxy. They were too busy building bigger, better toys. Earth had already moved on to the next chapter of their existence, already looking forward to exploring what lay beyond their solar system. It wasn't about beating the Xel'Varn, it was about perfecting the system, making sure no one else ever tried something that stupid again. On the galactic scale, word of Earth's capability spread quickly, but it wasn't the kind of attention that invited collaboration. It wasn't about alliance building or peace talks. No, it was a cautious respect that hung in the air. Every species who had ever doubted humanity now feared them. They feared the quiet precision, the unassuming nature that always hit a nuclear-level punch behind every handshake. Meanwhile, Earth's diplomats had their hands full with meetings not to negotiate peace, but to explain why their galaxy-wide reputation wasn't just a fluke. Leaders from every corner of the galaxy had one question in mind: how did they do it? The answer? Simple. They didn't overthink it. Where other civilizations had pondered politics, strategies, and morality, humanity had only one question: can we win? And if the answer was yes, then it was game over. The Xel'Varn had learned that the hard way. And then there was the fun part. Humanity's true genius lay in the way they engaged with the universe. They didn't throw themselves into space with the arrogance of a conqueror. They were explorers, adventurers, looking for problems to solve and new ways to break things. The Xel'Varn had learned that the hard way, too. There was nothing more terrifying than a species that had absolutely no intention of letting things get boring. As for the Xel'Varn, They became a cautionary tale, a story told in hushed tones by every Galactic Council meeting. And never mess with Earth. That was the moral. The galaxy had learned the lesson well, but it wasn't just about Earth's victory. It was about the fact that humanity didn't need to announce its power. It just had to use it. In the end, the universe didn't really change. Life went on, as it always does. But there was one fundamental shift. No one in the galaxy would ever again think it was okay to underestimate Earth. And as for humanity, they had a message for the stars. We don't need your respect, but we're definitely going to take your lunch money. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Sci-Fi Horizon Stories for more thrilling tales of science fiction and adventure. Because let's face it, when humanity's involved, you never know when the next cosmic smackdown will happen.